I thought that he is carrying through on what he has always dreamed of doing. I spent 4 years arguing with President Trump about trade, about deficits, about tariffs during his first term. And it became clear to me that he has some very, very deeply held views. They're completely mistaken in my judgment, but they are very deeply held. And at the heart of it is this notion that if you have a trade deficit with another country, the amount of that deficit is the measure of the amount that they're basically ripping you off. And he uses that terminology. He speaks that way all the time. Mm-hmm. It, of course, makes no economic sense whatsoever. The trade deficit just means our consumers happen to buy more products from that country than their consumers buy from us. Any number of completely reasonable reasons for that, but none of them are acceptable to Donald Trump. I think that worldview is kind of at the heart of this. I expected there would be some very severe tariffs. I, of course, had no idea exactly what levels would be imposed on which countries. You can see that was a pretty arbitrary and capricious approach. But I'm not really shocked by the magnitude.
What does this mean for business in Pennsylvania, Senator? It's good to have you back, by the way. And I realize you could have different answers here. We talked to a local brewer in the Washington, D.C. area who's perplexed. His back is against the wall because most of the materials he's using are suddenly now being tariffed. Or for a steel mill in Pennsylvania might have a different answer.
Yeah. So there will be pockets of industries and companies that will benefit from these protective tariffs. They won't have to deal with competition. They can raise their prices. They don't have to innovate as much. Americans may be kind of forced to buy from them. So there will be some that will have that benefit. But by far, the overwhelming majority will be the losers. Just think about the steel and aluminum tariffs that the president imposed in his first term. There's been a lot of research done on the effect of those tariffs. And the conclusion is for every job that was saved in the steel making industry, there were probably 8 to 10 jobs lost among companies that use steel. There's many, many times more industries that use these materials than the primary maker. And that downstream damage is very, very hard. Here's another thing to think about. Something like 40% of American imports are inputs for American manufacturers. So what we're doing with these sweeping across the board tariffs is we are systematically making American manufacturers less competitive because we're raising the prices they have to pay for the components of their products. The rest of the world isn't going through that. And so we will be at a competitive disadvantage. This is going to manifest itself in many ways. It's certainly going to be higher prices for consumers. It is going to be jobs lost. We've already seen announcements today of companies that are laying off workers. That's going to accelerate. And over time, it means a lower standard of living for Americans until finally, better sense takes hold and the process starts to unwind. But that can be a very difficult, and who knows how long that takes.
Well, but the White House is arguing, Senator, that this really is just step one of President Trump's economic plan. We still have tax cuts that they'll try to push through by the end of this year that they argue will help liven the economy. Obviously, your former chamber is taking steps to try to advance that legislative path forward in the next 24 hours or so as we expect a vote-a-rama to happen. To what extent will friendlier tax policy be able to offset the negative impacts you were just discussing?
Yeah. So, look, I think there's 3 categories in which the administration is likely to pursue, and in fact is pursuing really good economic policy, curbing federal spending. The federal government spends way too much money, and that would be very good for our economy overall if they're successful in curbing federal spending. Rolling back regulation. There's wildly excessive regulation. The Biden administration was very, very problematic with what it imposed across the economy. That rollback is constructive, and it is pro-growth. Energy dominance is really good for the economy. I think it's impossible probably at this point to quantify the relative components. But keep in mind on tax policy, I am 100% in favor of making permanent the 2017 tax reform. That's a very heavy lift. If we can get that done, that just maintains the status quo. That's just an extension of current policy. So there's not like a big surge to growth that comes from continuing current policy, right? What you do is you avoid a very damaging tax increase. But I really think that these tariffs are going to do a lot of damage.
I know you're watching these markets, Senator. Some things never change. You consider the negative wealth effect that this could have.
Yeah.
I wonder how worried you are about the potential impact on consumer spending, or if this market keeps dropping, if that's the one thing that can change Donald Trump's course on this.
I would hazard a guess that at some point it would, but if we're down 15% on the Nasdaq, and I'm not sure where we are at the moment, it's been pretty volatile, as you know. But 10, 15% declines, I doubt that would change his mind. I think it's going to have to manifest itself in the real economy. I think we're going to have to see the CPI prints that are accelerating. I think we're going to have to see the layoffs and see the factories closing because they're no longer competitive. I think that's going to have to happen before the president decides he's looking for an off-ramp, because he really believes that buying things from other countries is really bad for us, and he wants to curb that.
Well, what about your former colleagues in the Senate or in the House, for that matter? Do you expect, if they're seeing the, financial markets getting calls from constituents, that they could maybe try to push back? We already saw the passage of a resolution with the help of 4 Republicans of a Democratic resolution condemning the Canada tariffs. Specifically, Senator Chuck Grassley is co-sponsoring legislation that would see Congress having to approve tariffs within 60 days or them be nullified. Are you expecting more to materialize on that front?
Yes, I just don't know how long that's going to take. That's one of the many disturbing ironies of this. Of course, all of this is completely inconsistent with the constitutional assignment of responsibility for trade to Congress. The president doesn't have this authority. And yet we sit on the edge of our seats wondering what the latest whim is from the president, who's exercising an authority that, in my view, he doesn't have. I think, a lot of Republican voters have the view that the president's only been in office for a couple of months. We got to give him his opportunity, have him enact his agenda, and give him the benefit of the doubt. I think that will only last for so long. And when that starts to turn, because people see really rapidly rising prices, their job is jeopardized, they're hearing about layoffs and the other adverse effects, then it's going to be obvious to members of Congress that this is a very problematic road we're on, and they may want to find a way to begin to reverse some of these effects. But I think it's going to have to show up in the real economy first. Unfortunately, I think it will show up in the real economy.